clearing early tonight. Showers will affect Connacht and parts of the northwest overnight, but dry elsewhere. Lows of 8 to 11 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Football Show on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power. Join the Save Our Shirt movement today. More at saveourshirt.co.uk.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then. What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should there be an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
And you're very welcome along. We are closing in now, less than 24 hours to kick off the visit of the Swiss to Lansdowne Road, and we will have Kieran Cunningham talking about the Ireland-Switzerland game and the hope that we do get 3 more points ahead of the Euros. We'll also have Raphael Honigstein speaking about the amazing story, really, of Union Berlin, which is, one of the most heartwarming stories, I think, in European football in recent times. Before that, though, we have journalist Tim Vickery on. Tim is going to discuss Alexis Sanchez, one of the Marmite figures, I guess, of football, as well as many other things. But welcome along, Tim.
Lovely to be here. Let's kick the ball around.
Yeah, kicking the ball around is something Alexis Sanchez has done an awful lot in the last few years, just not for Manchester United.
Yes. I think here we've got a clear case of a player who's a victim of the crowded calendar of contemporary football. Should we run through it? Let's run through it. 2014 World Cup. He plays that. Chile get into the second round. They knock out the reigning champion Spain before getting into the second round. 2015 Copa America, all the way to the final. Alexis Sanchez with a little dink there in the penalty shootout that wins Chile's first ever serious piece of silverware. 2016, there's another Copa America, and he does it all again. Again, all the way to the final, penalty shootout. They beat Argentina in the final. 2017 Confederations Cup. Now, Chile, I think, blundered by taking their full-strength team to Russia for that one. Yes, they reached the final, but they paid the price. You can see that their team then just burned out totally and crashed and didn't even make the World Cup the following year. And I think Sanchez has paid the price for year after year after year without a proper break. Now, Sanchez, wherever he's gone, has worked hard to try and give value for money. He's a player who covers every blade of grass. He's almost like a box-to-box striker at times with the amount of ground that he's prepared to cover. But I think that's something which ended up undermining his time at Manchester United. I just don't think he was fit or fresh enough to do himself justice.
I don't think enough is made of this. When you look at, some of the key players in world football, the crowded schedules that are kind of brought along by how big the European combat has become with the Champions League and all that. The traditional model is so long gone now. And then you have these occasionally needless tournaments really in the summer. You look at Salah, Messi, sort of players like that who've struggled to kind of keep this schedule going. And all of a sudden you're 30 years of age like Sanchez and you're effectively washed up.
Yeah, and Messi is paying the price for this, it seems, at the start of this Barcelona season, didn't he? You got to remember with the South Americans, World Cup qualification for them is not like World Cup qualification or Nations Cup qualification in Europe. These games are full on. And there is a massive amount of travelling to do, both across the Atlantic and then within South America, because you play a double header. Let's imagine Chile are at home on the Friday, and then on the Tuesday they're away to Colombia. Now that's a long way to go. It's something like a 6-7 hour flight from Santiago to Bogota, and then a long 3-hour flight to Barranquilla to play that game. So the amount of travelling that these South American players do is off the scale, and at the end there's no respite. These are games in which you can't cruise, and it's no wonder that this ends up having an effect on performance, especially as every opportunity that the big European clubs have, in pre-season, they will travel far and wide to the United States or to the Far East or something in search of money. So for those who do it, many people are envious about the money that they earn, but the sacrifices involved are huge.
Yeah, that's a point as well. So we're not talking about somebody in a slave labour camp here. So these guys are obviously pampered footballers, such and such, which is fine. and they're paid ridiculously well, including Sanchez. Absolutely.
True.
But you can't expect these players to perform week in, week out. You don't run a racehorse every week of the year. You give them a 2 or 3 month break in the summer. You can't expect an athlete to just perform, and then, you're obviously, the South American scene very well. These guys are expected to go over there and be at their best. They're expected to be at their best at the start of the season. And for me, grand, they're paid well, but don't expect them to perform at their best level at that intensity week in, week out.
Now, Usain Bolt used to run, 100 metres? At a pitch, he'd run 200 metres. And how many times a year would he do that to the very best of his ability? The footballers, I think too many demands are being made of them. I remember a few years ago hearing a lecture from Arrigo Sacchi, the former Milan coach, the former director at Real Madrid, saying maybe we're reaching a point where we've given in much too much for the money, and perhaps some of these big players, they should start accepting being paid less in order to play less. Now, the calendar is out of the control of the players. The players are told, all right, we've got this game here today and another game on the other side of Atlantic tomorrow, and there you go. And the players who play for South American clubs, they are frequently expected, especially the Brazilians, where the calendar is just insane. It's a permanent quest to put 3 pints into a bottle that only holds 2. So often they will be playing for their national teams on Tuesday, and they will be expected to turn out for their clubs on Wednesday, sometimes on the other side of the Atlantic. And these are insane demands that are being made on players. And when you see someone like Alexis Sanchez not being able to give of his best at Manchester United, you have to wonder if all this is worth it. If we do need to sit down and just plan a more rational calendar that makes fewer demands on these players. I'm sure, Johnny, that you've come across lots of old players, as I have, who have trouble getting around these days. Top level sport is very, very aggressive on the body. They get paid very well, but there are huge sacrifices here, John.
You've actually just kind of made my next point there, in that clubs and fans do not give a toss about you once you've stopped playing. And if you're the guy that needs your hip replaced, or you can't basically get down the stairs in your mid-40s, nobody gives a toss anymore. And they're not going to mention that now when you have to kind of conform to this absolutely absurd schedule that you mentioned there. I should mention our football coverage is brought to you with thanks to Paddy Power. For information on responsible gambling, visit donlouis.net. I don't know, though, it's hard to envisage a situation where less to me is definitely more, but it's hard to, I think even in terms of football on TV now, Tim, saturation has gone way beyond saturation level. It's just hard to envisage a future where these guys are actually playing much less.
It certainly is, because everyone is addicted, and the money tree keeps giving the fruits. How do you step off that? And that's these are big decisions, for the administrators of the World Game. We need a very strong FIFA to take those kind of decisions, but the power is with the big European clubs. So it's very, very hard to find a solution to this. And I would imagine that the top players, they will have to end up picking and choosing more the games where they really give top whack. And imagine if we get a European Super League, because that's the way that the big clubs would like to push it, where you get the games of giants happening all the time. It's just more and more physical demands. I'm with you all the way. I think we've gone past saturation point. That's the remark that Arrigo Sacchi made a few years ago now. It's really stuck in my mind. We've given in too much to money, and I think that the spectacle would improve if there was less money, a little bit less money involved, a little bit less playing involved, and less would indeed be more. Yeah,
I think you're painting a kind of a dystopian future there with regard to the European Super League. But with Sanchez, he did make an interesting defence of his time at Man United. He started 13 games last season, and Man United won 10 and they drew the other 3. He scored 1 goal in those games, 3 assists, and he kind of basically backed that up ahead of a Chile press conference and pointed to his record when he was playing for Man United. I thought he was putting a kind of a very favourable slant on it there by damn lies and statistics.
Indeed, yeah. But where was he when he made those remarks?
He was at a Chile press conference.
Indeed, in the United States. So, he's just joined Inter Milan, and already he's made a long transatlantic journey. And his club career, when he looks back on it, there is a little bit of frustration there, because at Barcelona, he was winning, or he was in contention for the serious silverware, but he wasn't important in the team, and that hurt him. So he went to Arsenal, where he was very important to the team, but it was a team that wasn't in contention for winning the serious silverware. So I think he went to Manchester United hoping he could have both, and he ended up having neither. He ended up, being not important in a team that wasn't in contention for the serious silverware. So I wish him well at Inter Milan. And he's someone I watched from all the way up from when he was a teenager and predicted great things for. And he's done great things. But I think he will look back on his club career with just a little bit of frustration.
I think if you look at it as well, it's kind of symptomatic of many of the issues I would have with top level football at the moment, in that he was on about 400 grand a week, scored 5 times in 45 games. You're talking absolutely obscene money for a player who clearly wasn't worth it, or certainly wasn't able to be worth it because he was playing too much.
Yeah, I've no big complaint with if football is generating the money, with that money going to the players. And so often, I think some of the criticism that footballers receive for the amount of money they get paid is class-based. You don't hear this about golf professionals or whatever, because they're very often middle class. So I have no objection to, the money that's being generated, to that going to the players. Whether they're being asked to do too much, I think they are now being asked to do too much. I think someone who's on 400,000 a week, I think he could happily be on 200,000 a week, and still have a very, very nice life and still set himself up for the future, playing a little bit less. But those decisions are out of the hands of the players. Those decisions are in the hands of those who run the game, and there are so many competing interests, all wanting their share of the dollar, that it's very hard to see where a solution is going to come from.
Yeah, obviously Sanchez now goes to Inter on loan. He's going to join his ex-buddy Lukaku there. How is that going to work out for him, the pace of Italian football? Will that be in his favour, or will he take time to adjust over there?
Well, I think the key question, and he could adjust anywhere. He could adjust anywhere a ball is being kicked, providing that he's fit and fresh enough to do that. So that's the question that hovers over his career. If he's fit and fresh, don't matter where, you can take him anywhere, and he will do the business. If he's not fit and fresh, then you worry for him a little bit. Perhaps he's at a stage in his career where he'll have to change his game a little bit. Now, the amount of work that he put in for Arsenal, perhaps his body is just physically not capable of doing that anymore. And he's got an example there in the Italian league of Cristiano Ronaldo as someone who's handled these transitions extremely well. Who has really sat down and thought about it. Thought, at this stage in my career, I'm a little bit older. Perhaps I can't do that, but I can do this. Is Alexis Sanchez capable of a similar kind of transition? I don't know. So there are two questions for you. Is he fit and fresh enough to do it at the top level? And is he able to adapt his game to the fact that he's now past the 30 mark?
Let's move on to Neymar. Luis Suarez has confirmed WhatsApp conversations with Neymar over the Barcelona transfer. What next for Neymar?
Well, what next is playing for Brazil against Colombia on Friday night, and then Peru. And he's become a national team player now, isn't he? The last time we saw him in action was when he was injured, in a warm-up friendly for the Copa America, playing against Qatar for Brazil at the start of June. For Brazil, he's still extremely important. He's coming close now to 100 games for Brazil, and you can imagine him ending up overtaking Pelé and being the all-time top scorer. But where's he going to do it on a weekly basis? I always imagined that the most logical get out there from the situation he was in, the impasse at Paris Saint-Germain, was him going back to Barcelona in exchange for Philippe Coutinho plus other players plus cash. As soon as Coutinho went on loan to Bayern, I thought that's going to be very, very hard to pull that deal off. Now, the news from the Neymar camp is that the penny has well and truly dropped. He realises that in football terms, he is not such a young man in a hurry. He's closer to 28 than he is to 27. And that means that I think he will be thoroughly prepared to knuckle down at Paris Saint-Germain and try and give of his best. Now, that could well be in the interests of Paris Saint-Germain. You could argue that in sporting terms, they barely need him until January anyway, because it's only the French league and the group stages of the Champions League, and you'd expect them to meet those challenges. But if they want to get top dollar for him, he has to be buyable, which means he has to be in action. So what is the attitude of Paris Saint-Germain? Are they going to punish him, or are they going to use him? Now, there is clearly negative reaction to him from people who run in the club and from the fans. But there aren't that many things in football that 2 hat-tricks in consecutive weeks can't solve. What doesn't seem to be a problem, and I think this is very interesting, what doesn't seem to be a problem is his relationship with his Paris Saint-Germain teammates. They, it seems, would be quite happy to welcome him back. Very interesting also that the senior players in Barcelona were very happy to welcome him back as well. He's also extremely popular with his Brazil teammates. And this, I think, sheds fresh light on him. There is a public Neymar, and it's a public Neymar that communicates extremely well with his people, with his generation, with the Instagram generation, if you like, but communicates extremely badly with everyone else, and really puts people's backs up. But it seems in the dressing room there is a real Neymar who people like very, very much. Very interesting, I thought, that the Paris Saint-Germain players don't seem to have any problem at all taking him back. I think I've only spoken to him once, and that was many years ago. But I came away with the impression that there's a nice fella in there, amid all the madness of being a boy prince and being a spoilt boy prince. There's a nice fella in there, and I hope for his benefit and for the benefit of football that we see him firing on all cylinders, because it's often forgotten amongst all the fuss that he generates. He is a magnificent player. We all win from him being on the field doing what he does best, and I hope it's in everyone's interests, even if it's only for a few months, for him to be doing that at Paris Saint-Germain.
It's all about dystopian futures tonight. I walked out of the office last night. The first 3 people I met on the street were looking at their phones and practically walked into me. And now you're talking about a footballer who's kind of really only able to communicate via Instagram?
Well, he's part of that generation, and with Neymar, I don't think there's ever, perhaps until maybe the last few months when the relationship broke down at Paris Saint-Germain, I don't think there's ever really been a contradiction between his desire to live an Instagram celebrity lifestyle and being a footballer. I think he always grew up obsessed by fame and obsessed by celebrity. He wanted to be mates with Justin Bieber. And I think there was a realisation that the way to do that was to excel on the football field. And if he doesn't do that, he's just another footballer. If he is a star on the football field, and he loves doing it, it's what he does wonderfully well. But if he is a star on the football field, then he earns the right for the gates of paradise to open and to have all of those celebrity things that he's always dreamt about. I don't think this is a case of, say, Ronaldinho. Now, Ronaldinho was a magnificently talented player who, by the age of 26, had decided he wasn't that interested anymore, and what he did off the field was much more interesting to him than what he did on the field. I think with Neymar, the two have lived in harmony. A question that he needs to answer now is, can he still do that? Because, Johnny boy, we all get older, and there are things that we can do at 24 that we can't do a little bit later. So if...
I resent the fact that you put Johnny and we all get older in the one kind of sentence there, but anyway.
I'm sorry, John. Yeah. You are not immune to the laws of nature.
No.
So I think a key thing with Neymar now, and the information I have, is that he realises that he's in a hurry. How much is he prepared to jettison off the field in terms of personal pride, in terms of things that he's said about Paris Saint-Germain and so on? How much is he prepared to jettison to give the next 4 years total focus on the football field? Because he's coming up 28. He has, at the top level, at his absolute physical peak, he's got 4 seasons left. So if you're in his shoes, you think, well, let's scale down everything else now. Let's just make sure that we do this well, and then we can enjoy that for the rest of our lives. It's hard sometimes for young people to work out that they will get older. I think Neymar is beginning to realise that. Hopefully, he can make the necessary adjustments. We all win there from the presence of a magnificent player on the field.
You just finally, as well, Philippe Coutinho going to Bayern, hoping things kick-start from there. How do you see that working out?
Well, it'd be interesting to see in the long term where they play him. On Bayern of traditionally, you've associated them more with wingers than with a kind of number 10 figure, and he's not a Bayern style winger. He's floated in from wide both flanks, specifically from wide on the left into that number 10 role. It does mean that he's probably competing for a place in the Bayern side with Thomas Müller. Very, very different type of player. Now, Philippe Coutinho, again, one I've followed all the way up. And he has often found the step-ups difficult. I think often for psychological reasons. He's quite a shy fellow. I think maybe there's a little bit of melancholy in there. Very significant. Where has he come off in his career? Obviously at Liverpool, where they had Jurgen Klopp and so on putting his arm around him. Also on loan at Espanyol under Mauricio Pochettino, who does so well with players of that psychological profile, is so warm and human and open. So how Bayern Munich handle him, I think, will be important, because it might go wrong. They might decide he's not a natural fit, although there's a huge fuss about them signing him, because it's like getting a Premier League superstar, an ex-Barcelona player in the Bundesliga. So there's huge fuss about it. I wonder also with the national team, because with Brazil, the position that Coutinho operated in the Copa America, which Brazil won recently, was central, behind the main striker, who was Felipe Coutinho. Now, Brazil won the Copa America. There were some ups and downs along the way, and Coutinho had moments, but he wasn't totally convincing. And that, I understand it, is the position that Brazil want to try Neymar in. So it could well be that, okay, they can play Neymar there and Coutinho go back to wide on the wing. Or it could be that they are competing for the same place in the starting lineup, in which case, long term, I think that's Neymar's place and not Felipe Coutinho's. So, John, we're living in interesting times.
We are indeed. Thanks a million, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll be back with Raphael Honigstein after these.
Football on Off the Ball
with Paddy Power. Join the Save Our Shirt movement today. More at saveourshirt.co.uk.
Time for Tell Me Why with Graham Finlay, as ever. If you have a question for Graham, you can send it into afternoon@newstalk.com. Today's question is, does fracking cause earthquakes? Graham, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Does it?
Yes.
See you, Graham.
Moncrief.
It's a fairly sexy topic, I have to say, says Ned. That's the second person then who's texted in. And when they heard about fracking, it made them think about sex. What's wrong with people?
Weekdays from 2 p.m.
with the all-new Dacia Duster.
On News Talk.
Assistant, people say I have an eye for design. Where should I study?
Griffith College. I draw the line at anywhere else.
Nice. Fit Flex Future. Visit griffith.ie.
Football Index, the football stock market.
Remember that first time on the terraces, where it all began. The heroes, the villains, the highs, the lows. All the while, you were learning. Now use that knowledge on Football Index. Join tens of thousands of fans trading the world's top players. Football Index, the game changed. App available. 18+, terms and conditions apply. Gamble responsibly.
On September 17th, the Aviva Stadium plays host to the 1-0 Sports Business Conference. Experience the off-the-field future of the sports industry with the NFL, Microsoft, Nike and Formula One. 4 stages, 40 international speakers, world-leading brands. Tickets are available at 1-0.com.
Now is the time to discover the world. Turkish Airlines Fly Festival has begun. Book your ticket with Turkish Airlines before the 23rd of September. Fly between the 29th of August 2019 and 20th of May 2020 with Turkish Airlines special fares. Terms and conditions apply. For detailed information, please visit turkishairlines.com. Turkish Airlines. Widen your world.
Hello, I'm Tom Murphy, and I challenge you to change from using shaving foams and gels to De Facto shaving oil and do your skin and the planet a big favour. De Facto shaving oil is made from pure natural oils with no nasty chemicals. And with De Facto, there's no wrecking the planet with aluminium cans. Buy De Facto directly from defactoshave.com and from selected pharmacies. DEFACTO, De Facto, the best anyone can get.
Hi, I'm Maya Dunphy. Ireland's biggest coffee morning for hospice, together with Bewley's, takes place on Thursday the 19th of September. Please support your local hospice and the vital work they do in your community by hosting a coffee morning. Visit hospicecoffeemorning.ie or call 1890 998 995. That's 1890 998 995. Remember, every cup counts.
A business needs to be creative to stay ahead of the game. And creative brains need space to think. Give them space. Think better. do it with a little style. Castleknock means business. Discover more at castleknockhotel.com.
Have a great evening with itsforwomen.ie. Don't live your life on hold. Get a quote now at itsforwomen.ie and see why we're trusted by over 130,000 women in Ireland.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Now we're joined by Raphael Honigstein, who is writing for The Athletic, which immediately piqued my interest because as a journalist, obviously with various forms of media, but with a kind of a bit of a tie to the old print media, I'm intrigued by how The Athletic is getting on in terms of moving towards the online, media. Rafa, can you explain what The Athletic is like and how it's worked for you so far?
Well, The Athletic is really an online subscription-based publication, if you will, with an emphasis on deeper features, more researched pieces, not necessarily reacting to games or press conferences, but looking at things from a more analytical side and from a more feature side. I think you have to maybe ask the readers if they enjoy it or not, but I can only, since I need to join them, and it's been amazing because your work rhythm is a little bit different and you get to do the kind of stuff that as a journalist you really want to do, which is to take really time and a lot of effort, speak to a lot of people, and only once the piece is ready, then you have to publish because there are no hard and fast deadlines. So it's been, from my side, it's been absolutely brilliant to work for them.
I guess it is the future as well.
Well, I hope that we're the future of journalism. It would be nice to know that the business concept works. I think getting people to pay for content is not easy, especially when it comes to journalism, because they are used to a lot of very good free publications, free content out there at the same time. And I think if you offer enough original content, enough stuff that's a little bit different, maybe a little bit less time sensitive, a little bit deeper, more feature based, hopefully there will be enough of an audience there who'll take us up and ensure that we can go forward and keep doing what we're doing.
I'm not sure if you can see me, but when I heard we were doing something on Union Berlin, I couldn't but bring this little baby into the studio, which is an old jersey which I bought in Berlin a few years ago. It was actually the last jersey I think I bought that was small size. It was like kids extra large size, so I nicked like £5 off the full price, but it was a concept that interested me because of, I guess, their background and all that, but didn't expect that they'd end up in the Bundesliga and got off the mark at the weekend. And this is an incredible story, I suppose, in the world of modern football.
Yeah, it is. I thought you were saying that you bought this because you were a different size back then, but
it was like the last time I bought like youth extra large, which was in my mid-20s.
Yeah, understand. Well, it is an unbelievable story, and you're right. I don't think anyone, perhaps not even they themselves, expected to be in the Bundesliga this year. This is a club that really, to all intents and purposes, started in the 60s in the sort of current guise. And we're always on the wrong side of the tracks, as it were, as far as the communist regime was concerned in East Germany. BFC, Dynamo Berlin, they had the backing from the Stasi. They had the best players. They would often have the referee decisions going for them magically somehow. And Union were sort of the poorer relatives. But because of that situation, I think they became kind of a magnet for people who were a little bit different, who saw themselves as slightly rebellious. And that streak kind of carried on after unification. And I guess the other thing that they're well known for is when they ran into financial problems, they could really rely on the support of their fans to an extent that is really unparalleled, I think. Fans, even though it's a well told story, maybe not all of our listeners have heard it, fans themselves turned up in their thousands to rebuild the stadium when they had to. Carpenters, painters, they all turned up and actually did it with their own hands. And there was another incident where they donated blood en masse to raise funds. So the relationship between the fans and the club, which is perhaps stereotypically speaking slightly more organic in Germany because of the ownership structure, with Union is sort of the most extreme example. And I think they play a little bit on that, but at the same time, it's nice to see a club from a very, very different background, both politically, but also the way they're set up, now mixing up with the big boys and indeed beating Dortmund as they did last Saturday.
Yeah, like I guess they must have kind of support across Germany, as well as just kind of a protest left-wing type operative that is a little bit cool. I mean, we've seen even in Dublin, Bohemians now have kind of embraced that type of, it's almost like a little bit of a cult that we're anti kind of football in the way that it's going right now. We stand for something. Our fans kind of, come in and part own the club and so forth. It's obviously a little bit cool to support a team like Union in Germany.
Yeah, it is. Although it is, I would say, still a very localized phenomenon. I mean, in West Berlin, I don't think you'll probably find too many Union Berlin supporters, maybe from people who recently moved to Berlin from outside of the city. They would take them up a little bit like St. Pauli, I saw the team. If you're not from Hamburg and you're thinking of Hamburg, a cool team, St. Pauli come to mind, but in Hamburg it's still very much mixed depending on how you grew up and your family, etc. But of course, to be a little bit different, to be a little bit authentic, if you will, although that is a difficult word sometimes to use, does come with its own appeal. And the more people are getting worried about the commercialization of football and the concentration of wealth, the more I think there's a clamor and a need almost to embrace clubs that are a little bit different. And they don't get much more different than Union.
What's their stadium like?
And the stadium is amazing. It's hugely atmospheric. It is very old school, like a classic sort of second or third division British ground, if you will. Different sizes of the stands, very, very close to the pitch. No the modern amenities. They still change the scoreboard manually, so someone actually turns up and changes when someone scores. And it's also being used as a rallying point for the community. You might have seen some pictures before Christmas. The fans were often meeting there, putting sofas on the pitch and then singing Christmas songs together, singing Christmas carols together in a very atmospheric setting. So this really is, even if you want to be a little bit cynical about this is actually genuinely a different club. And it's nice to see them, get to the Bundesliga and perhaps even stay there, which would really be an amazing story.
Yeah, so they beat Dortmund 3-1 at the weekend. Dortmund, obviously a club with a kind of industrial working class background ethos as well. But how much of a shock was this in the Bundesliga?
This was a huge shock because Union looked a little bit naive and a little bit out of their depth when they had their first game at home against Leipzig. Now they came up against Dortmund, who'd had a perfect record until then. Dortmund, who many people, me included, had tipped for the title, maybe just ahead of Bayern. And they somehow kind of destroyed Dortmund. Dortmund had chances. They played okay in the first half. But by sheer sort of willpower and the energy that was filtering through from the stands and an effort and sort of good old-fashioned blood, sweat and tears approach, they managed to drag Dortmund down to their level and then beat them there by being very efficient, very clinical from that pieces in particular. And it was just a reminder that for all the quality that Dortmund and perhaps other teams have, Union will give everybody a game, certainly in East Berlin, because that atmosphere and that special euphoria, I think, goes a long way. I'm not sure how long you can sustain that, but certainly now Dortmund, perhaps being unlucky, running into them in the second ever Bundesliga home game, found it was too much to cope.
Yeah, you mentioned East Berlin. I've visited Berlin, found it an absolutely fascinating city, and obviously its history is compelling, but does it still have that sort of vibe of post the poorer relation of the city before the Berlin Wall, and is that still something that kind of it's the people of East Berlin can embrace?
I think for the city of Berlin itself, it's difficult to say that the separation still exists. There are certain areas in East Berlin where you can still see the architecture almost unchanged from social democratic Germany, those big high rises, very cheaply built. But for the rest of the city, I think it has become its own its own sort of organism, which is forever changing. But what Union do, I think, and what they stand for is, of course, the East as a bigger idea. The East as a place that is distinct from the rest of Germany. I think people buy into that, even though within that, Union still have a special place because, as you might know, some of the Eastern clubs have issues with right-wing problems in the stands and all sorts of stuff that is a little bit unsavory.
Can you explain that, actually?
Well, unfortunately, it's throughout Eastern Germany. You have a very strong anti-immigrant sentiment within the population. We had elections only just last Sunday in 2 federal states in Eastern Germany, and the AfD, which is the right-wing party, got close to 30%, which is very worrying. They weren't the strongest party in either of those states, but they came very close, and it shows you about the strength of the right-wing populist sentiment that unfortunately is still very prevalent. I think as a reaction to what happened after the fall of the wall, where I think a lot of people there somehow felt a little bit neglected and felt that they are on the defensive. And of course, populism, as you've seen throughout Western Europe, has a good knack for picking these people up and giving them some sense of belonging. And in this case, the belonging is we are different and we don't want the West and we don't necessarily want people from outside Germany. Now, Union is different. Union did have and perhaps still has a fair section of people who may be in a similar camp, but at the same time, because of that rebellious streak and that sort of alternative vibe, it's much harder to pin them down politically. And so they're a little bit distinct. But at the same time, they do represent the east of the city, they do represent the east of Germany. And I think it's on a different level than Leipzig, who are maybe a little bit compromised because of the Red Bull involvement. It is seen as the authentic East German club now mixing up with the big boys. And I think it does serve as a rallying point for people who are proud that they kind of still exist and still be seen at this level.
What's the ticket structure in Germany? You mentioned there, I've travelled a little bit around Europe, gone to the odd game, particularly to Italy. I haven't been to a Bundesliga game, but when you see the kind of absurdity of ticket prices in some countries, Germany, I understand, is still sticking to a fairly, I suppose, egalitarian model and trying to encourage people to go to the games.
Yeah, by and large, I think that's correct. You have to look at it on a club-by-club basis. For example, the Bayern example that's often used has to be put into context because effectively they subsidize the annual tickets of the hardcore fans. So if you're one of those guys behind the Southern goal, waving your flags, and you've been there and you're always there, you only pay, I think, less than 200 euros for the whole season. Of course, Bayern could make a lot more money, but the rationale is we want these guys to be there, and we make the money from the business seats. We make the money from day trippers who, if they turn up, will pay a lot of money. So the average price is quite low, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if you turn up without a season ticket and you just want to be there somehow, they could necessarily get a cheap ticket. Places like Hertha, for example, they let in kids under 14 for free. So, there are still places where you can get sort of a decent deal. But because of what I just explained, because annual ticket prices are effectively subsidized and sold below market value, it doesn't necessarily mean that the availability for the casual fan is as easy and is as cheap as the headline figure. And
just finally, how would you assess the general merit of German football going into European combat in the Champions League? How do you think they'll get on?
Well, I think Dortmund have a little bit unlucky with a draw. Having Barcelona and Inter in their group is going to put them at risk of getting knocked out, but you'd still hope that they can make it. Leverkusen have a decent draw. Leipzig have a decent draw, which is good. And Bayern, of course, are expected to qualify and go quite deep, even though they got knocked out the last 16 stage by Liverpool. I think by and large, German football is not bad. We're perhaps not quite at the level where we had outstanding managers that were the envy of European football in Guardiola, in Klopp, in Tuchel. Maybe, we're going through a cycle where the managing is good, but perhaps not quite as transformative. So to work within your resources might not be as effective if you take on the English teams, if you take on the Spanish teams. But I still think combined with the national team and the health of that side sort of resurrecting themselves, that German football doesn't have to be too down about itself. It's in a good place. And I think if you want to take it back to what we talked about earlier, it still manages just about to make people who are most important happy with just the fans on the ground.
Thanks for your time, Rafa.
Pleasure.
We'll be back after these.
Off the Ball on News Talk.
Movie buffs and sports fans are about to clash because the sale that stacks up is back. Switch to Virgin Media and get superfast broadband and TV with Virgin Media Sport, and now with the choice of Sky Sports or Sky Cinema. All for an awesome €55 a month for 12 months. The sale that stacks up. Now on. See virginmedia.ie.
T's and C's apply. See virginmedia.ie. New customers only. 12-month contract. Offer ends